The dust kicked up around Grace Donnelly's boots as she hauled another sack of flour from the wagon, her 32-year-old frame moving with practiced efficiency through the late afternoon heat of Brownsville, Texas, in the spring of 1878. She had heard the whispers earlier that morning when Mrs. Patterson and her daughter had come into the general store where Grace worked, their voices dropping to hushed tones, before rising just loud enough for her to catch the words "poor old maid" and "past her prime." Grace had stopped caring what the townspeople said about her unmarried status years ago, or so she told herself as she wiped the sweat from her brow and continued unloading the supply wagon. Her father had owned this store before consumption took him 2 years back, and her mother had followed 6 months later from a heart that simply gave out from grief. Grace had inherited the business and the small house behind it, and she ran both with the same stubborn determination that had seen her through every hardship life had thrown her way. "Miss Donnelly, you should not be lifting those heavy sacks yourself," came a voice from behind her, deep and touched with concern. Grace turned to find Deacon Zimmerman standing there, hat in hand, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the slanting sunlight. She had seen him around town for the past 3 weeks, ever since he had arrived driving cattle north for the Morrison Ranch. Most of the cowboys had moved on after getting paid, but Deacon had stayed, taking work as a ranch hand and making himself useful wherever strong hands were needed. "I have been managing just fine on my own for 2 years now, Mr. Zimmerman," Grace replied, though her tone held no real bite. There was something about this cowboy that softened her usual defensive walls, something in his honest brown eyes and the respectful way he always addressed her. "I do not doubt that for a second, madam," Deacon said, stepping forward and effortlessly lifting the flour sack she had been struggling with. "But just because you can does not mean you should when there is help available." Grace opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. The truth was, her back had been aching something fierce lately, and pride would not pay her doctor bills if she injured herself. "Very well, thank you." They worked in companionable silence for the next 20 minutes, Deacon handling the heavy sacks while Grace directed him where to place everything in the storeroom. When the wagon was empty, she wiped her hands on her apron and reached into her pocket for a few coins. "For your trouble," she said, holding them out. Deacon looked at the money, then at her face and shook his head. "I did not help you for payment, Miss Donnelly." "Then why did you help?" "Because you needed help and I was here to give it." He settled his hat back on his head, dark hair curling slightly at the edges beneath the brim. "And because I have been looking for an excuse to talk to you properly for near about 2 weeks now." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "I see. I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you sometime. Take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant, perhaps, or to the church social next Sunday." The flutter of hope that rose in Grace's chest was immediately tamped down by the harsh voice of reality. She was 32 years old, well past the age when most women married. This handsome cowboy, who could not be more than 25 or 26 by the look of him, surely had his pick of younger women in town. "Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate your help today, but I am afraid I must decline your invitation." "Why?" The direct question caught her off guard. "I beg your pardon. Why must you decline? Do you find my company unpleasant? Have I offended you in some way?" "No, of course not. You have been nothing but kind and respectful." "Then why?" Grace sighed, deciding that honesty would be the kindest way to discourage his interest. "Mr. Zimmerman, I am 32 years old. I am well past the age of courting and marriage. You should set your sights on one of the younger ladies in town, someone more appropriate." Deacon was quiet for a moment, then he did something unexpected. He laughed, not mockingly but with genuine warmth. "Miss Donnelly, I am 31 years old. I have spent the better part of the last 13 years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas and back again. I have met plenty of young girls who giggled behind their hands and plenty of women my own age who seemed to think a husband was nothing more than a means to security. But you are the first woman I have met in a very long time who interests me, who seems to have substance and strength and a mind of her own." "I am too old for marriage," Grace repeated, but her voice wavered slightly. "According to who?" "Some gossiping townswomen who have nothing better to do than tear down a hard-working woman who threatens them by being independent." Deacon stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Miss Donnelly, Grace, if I may be so bold, you are exactly the right age. You know who you are. You know what you want. You have built a life for yourself. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be admired." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back rapidly. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her with such respect, such genuine admiration. "You barely know me. Then let me get to know you better. That is all I am asking. One dinner, one conversation. If at the end of it you truly have no interest in seeing me again, I will respect that and trouble you no further." She knew she should say no. She knew that getting her hopes up would only lead to heartache when he inevitably realized that the town gossips were right, that she was too set in her ways, too old to be the kind of wife a man wanted. But something in his eyes made her want to take the risk. "One dinner," she agreed quietly. "Saturday evening, if that suits you." The smile that broke across Deacon's face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Saturday evening suits me just fine. I will call for you at 6 o'clock." After he left, Grace stood in the stockroom for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating an unfamiliar rapid rhythm. She was being foolish, she told herself. She was setting herself up for disappointment. But beneath the fear and doubt, there was a small voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was her chance at something she had long ago stopped believing she deserved. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Grace found herself paying more attention to her appearance, taking extra care with her hair in the mornings, and wearing her better dresses to work in the store. She caught Martha Jenkins, her part-time helper, giving her knowing looks, but the young woman was kind enough not to comment. On Thursday afternoon, while Grace was arranging a new shipment of fabric bolts, Deacon came into the store. He tipped his hat to her, that warm smile playing at his lips, and she felt her stomach do a little flip. "Good afternoon, Miss Donnelly. I came to pick up some supplies for the ranch." He handed her a list written in a neat, careful hand. Grace scanned the items, grateful for something to focus on besides the way his presence seemed to fill the small space. "I can have this ready for you by tomorrow morning. No rush. I am in no hurry." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "How has your week been?" "Busy, but that is good for business." She pulled down a box of ammunition from the shelf behind her, checking the caliber against his list. "And yours?" "Hot and dusty, but I cannot complain. Mr. Morrison is a fair employer and the work is honest." He paused, then added, "I have been thinking about our dinner on Saturday." Having second thoughts, Grace tried to keep her voice light, but she could hear the underlying tension in it. "Only about where to take you. The hotel restaurant is fine, but I was hoping for somewhere we might talk more privately. Would you consider letting me bring dinner to you? I could cook something, or purchase food from the hotel and bring it to your home, if that would not be too forward." Grace considered this. Having him to her home was certainly more intimate than a public dinner, but it also meant they would not have the entire town watching and gossiping about them. "I could prepare dinner for us at my house. It would be more comfortable than the restaurant. I could not ask you to go to that trouble." "You did not ask, I offered." She wrote out his order on a slip of paper, her movements brisk and efficient. "Besides, I am a better cook than the hotel chef, if I do say so myself." Deacon's smile widened. "Then I accept with gratitude. Is there anything I can bring?" "Just yourself and an appetite." After he collected his supplies the next morning and left, Martha finally spoke up. "He is a good man, Miss Grace. Do not let the busybodies in this town make you think otherwise." Grace looked at the young woman in surprise. Martha was only 19, married to a farmer just outside of town. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I heard Mrs. Patterson in here yesterday talking about how scandalous it was that a man was calling on you, saying you should know your place as a spinster and not go putting on airs." Martha's young face was flushed with indignation. "I told her that you were the finest woman in this town and any man would be lucky to have you, and she had no business spreading such poison." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Martha. That was kind of you, but you should not make enemies on my account. Mrs. Patterson has been trying to match Mr. Zimmerman with her daughter Emily since he arrived in town, but he has not shown a bit of interest. That is why she is being so hateful. She is jealous. Emily is a lovely young woman. Emily is a vapid child who cares more about her dress ribbons than anything of substance," Martha said bluntly. "And Mr. Zimmerman is smart enough to see that. He wants a real woman, not a silly girl. He wants you." Grace did not know what to say to that, so she simply squeezed Martha's hand in thanks and returned to her work. But the young woman's words stayed with her, warming her from the inside out. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Grace closed the store at 4 o'clock, giving herself 2 hours to prepare. She had planned the menu carefully, nothing too elaborate but dishes she knew she made well. A roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread, green beans from her garden, and an apple pie that was cooling on her kitchen windowsill. She changed into her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. It was not new, but it was well made and flattering, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt. She arranged her honey blonde hair, which she usually kept in a simple bun, into a softer style with curls framing her face. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman who was neither young nor old, but somewhere in that indefinable middle ground where society seemed determined to render her invisible. But Deacon did not look at her like she was invisible. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the room, in the town, in the whole state of Texas. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Grace took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and answered it. Deacon stood on her porch, cleaned up and wearing what were obviously his best clothes. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, their purple and yellow blooms bright against his sun-bronzed hands. "Good evening, Grace. You look beautiful." "Thank you. Please come in." She accepted the flowers, burying her nose in them to hide her flushed cheeks. "These are lovely." "Not nearly as lovely as you." Grace led him into her small parlor, suddenly seeing her home through his eyes. It was clean and neat but modest, the furniture worn but cared for. Books lined one wall, everything from Shakespeare to agricultural journals. A sampler her mother had made hung above the fireplace, its neat stitches spelling out home is where the heart finds peace. "You have a nice place here," Deacon said, and he sounded sincere. "It feels like a real home." "It is small, but it suits me." Grace arranged the flowers in a vase, then gestured toward the kitchen. "Dinner is almost ready. Would you like something to drink? I have water, coffee, or lemonade." "Lemonade sounds wonderful, thank you." They moved into the kitchen, where the good smells of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. Deacon insisted on helping her carry dishes to the small dining table, and soon they were seated across from each other, the meal laid out between them. "This looks incredible," Deacon said. Thank you for going to so much trouble." "It was no trouble." Grace served him generous portions, pleased by his obvious appreciation. "You said you wanted to get to know me better. What would you like to know?" "Everything," he said simply. "Start wherever you like." So she did. As they ate, Grace found herself talking more freely than she had in years. She told him about growing up in Brownsville, about helping her father in the store from the time she was old enough to count change. She talked about her mother's gentle nature and her father's business sense, about the books she loved to read and the garden she tended behind the house. "I had a beau once," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "When I was 23. His name was William, and he was a clerk in the land office. We courted for nearly a year, and I thought we would marry." "What happened?" Deacon asked gently. "His family moved to Colorado and wanted him to go with them. He asked me to come, but my father was already sick by then, though we did not know how sick. I could not leave him." Grace set down her fork, the old pain of that decision still tender even after 9 years. "William said he understood, but he left and I never heard from him again. Later I heard he married a banker's daughter in Denver. That must have been hard." "It was, but I do not regret my choice. My father needed me, and I was able to give him comfort in his final years. That meant more to me than following a man who was not willing to fight for me." Deacon nodded slowly. "You deserved someone who would fight for you, who would stay or find a way to make it work." "What about you?" Grace asked, wanting to turn the conversation away from her own heartbreak. "Surely a man like you has left a trail of broken hearts from here to Kansas." He laughed at that, shaking his head. "Hardly. I have had a few brief attachments over the years, women I met in various towns, but nothing that lasted beyond a few weeks or months. The life of a drover is not conducive to building relationships. You are here 1 month and gone the next, always moving, always working. What made you stop? Why stay here in Brownsville?" Deacon was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I suppose I got tired of drifting. I am 31 years old, and what do I have to show for it? A good horse, a decent saddle, and some money saved up. No home, no family, no roots anywhere. I watched my brother settle down 5 years ago on a farm in Missouri, and when I visited him last year, I saw something in his life that I wanted for mine. Purpose. Belonging. Someone to come home to at the end of the day. Is that why you asked to court me? Because you are ready to settle down and I happen to be convenient?" "No." His response was immediate and firm. "I asked to court you because from the first moment I saw you, I felt something I have never felt before. You were handling a difficult customer with grace and firmness, never losing your composure even when he was being unreasonable. After he left, I saw you take a deep breath and smile at the next person in line like nothing had happened. I thought, that is a strong woman, that is a woman worth knowing." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You make it sound much more impressive than it was." "I am only telling you what I saw, what I continue to see every time I look at you." They finished dinner, and Grace brought out the apple pie, cutting generous slices and serving them with fresh cream. Deacon groaned with pleasure at the first bite. "This might be the best pie I have ever tasted." "No, it is definitely the best pie I have ever tasted. You are flattering me. I am telling you the truth. Grace, you are an incredible cook, you run a successful business, you own your own home. You are everything a man could want in a partner. The fact that other men have been too blind or too intimidated to see that is their loss, not your failing. The town sees me as a spinster, an object of pity." "The town can go hang," Deacon said with sudden vehemence. "Forgive my language, but I mean it. What does the opinion of narrow-minded gossips matter? You have built a good life for yourself. You should be proud of that, not ashamed." "I am proud of it," Grace said softly. but I would be lying if I said I did not wish things had been different, that I had someone to share it with. Deacon reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and solid against her skin. Maybe you still can. Maybe it is not too late for either of us to have what we want. Grace looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. In his eyes, she saw sincerity, hope, and something else that made her heart race. You barely know me. How can you be sure? I know enough to want to know more. I know enough to believe that what I feel is real and worth pursuing. He squeezed her hand gently. I am not asking you to marry me tonight, Grace. I am just asking you to give us a chance. Let me court you properly. Let us see where this leads. She knew it was reckless. She knew that hope was a dangerous thing for a woman her age, that the higher you flew, the farther you could fall. But looking into Deacon's eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand around hers, Grace decided that she would rather risk the fall than never fly at all. All right, she whispered. Let us see where this leads. The smile that broke across his face was worth every risk she was taking. They moved to the parlor after dinner, sitting together on the small sofa and talking late into the evening. Deacon told her about his childhood in Tennessee, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17 and heading west with his older brother to find work. He talked about the hard years learning the cattle trade, the long drives, the dangerous river crossings, and the storms that could scatter a herd in minutes. I have seen a lot of this country, he said. From Texas to Montana, through Oklahoma Territory and Kansas and Nebraska. Beautiful land, all of it, but I am ready to stop seeing and start living, if that makes sense. It does. Grace drew her shawl closer around her shoulders as the evening grew cool. I have barely left Brownsville in my entire life. The farthest I have traveled is to San Antonio twice with my father to purchase inventory. Would you like to travel, to see more of the country? I used to dream about it when I was younger, but running the store does not leave much opportunity for adventure. Maybe we could take small trips together, Deacon suggested. Nothing too long or far, just enough to satisfy curiosity. There are some beautiful places not too far from here. The hill country, the Gulf Coast. That sounds wonderful. Grace allowed herself to imagine it, taking trips with this man beside her, seeing new places through his eyes while he saw familiar places through hers. When Deacon finally stood to leave, Grace felt a pang of disappointment that the evening was ending. He paused at the door, turning to face her in the lamplight. Thank you for tonight, for the meal, for the conversation, for taking a chance on me. Thank you for seeing me, Grace replied. Really seeing me, not just what the town says I am. Grace, I need you to understand something. He took both her hands in his expression serious. I do not care what anyone in this town thinks or says about you, about us. You are exactly the right age for me. You are exactly the right woman for me. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they will have to answer to me. Before she could respond, he lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was both old-fashioned and intimate, and it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. May I see you tomorrow, after church services? I would like that. Then I will call on you tomorrow afternoon. Sleep well, Grace. After he left, Grace leaned against the closed door, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. She felt like a young girl again, giddy and hopeful and terrified all at once. But she was not a young girl. She was a grown woman who had learned through hard experience that life rarely gave second chances at happiness. If this was her second chance, she was not going to waste it. The next morning, Grace arrived at church early, as was her habit. She slid into her usual pew and opened her hymnal, trying to focus on the service ahead. But she was acutely aware of the whispers around her, the sidelong glances and raised eyebrows. Mrs. Patterson and her daughter Emily arrived in a rustle of expensive silk, taking their place 3 rows ahead. Grace saw Mrs. Patterson lean over to whisper something to Mrs. Henderson, both women glancing back at her with expressions that were far from friendly. Then Deacon arrived, and suddenly the reason for the increased gossip became clear. He looked around the small church, his eyes finding Grace immediately. Without hesitation, he walked directly to her pew and asked quietly, "May I sit with you?" Grace was aware of every eye in the church on them, of the sudden hush that fell over the congregation. This was a statement, a public declaration that he was courting her. If she said yes, there would be no going back, no pretending this was anything casual or insignificant. "Please do," she said clearly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Deacon settled beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. He smelled of soap and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. When the service began and they stood to sing the opening hymn, he shared her hymnal, his deep voice blending with her soprano in a way that felt right, like they had been singing together for years instead of for the first time. After the service, as people filed out into the bright Sunday morning, Grace braced herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Sure enough, Mrs. Patterson positioned herself directly in their path, her daughter at her side. "Mr. Zimmerman, how nice to see you in church," she said, her voice sugary sweet and completely insincere. "I was hoping you might join us for Sunday dinner. Emily has been so looking forward to getting to know you better." Emily blushed prettily, her blonde curls bouncing as she smiled up at Deacon. She was lovely in the way only 20-year-old girls could be, all dewy skin and bright eyes and innocent charm. "That is very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson, but I am afraid I must decline," Deacon said politely. "I have already made plans for this afternoon." "Oh," Mrs. Patterson's smile sharpened. "Well, perhaps another time. I do think it is so important for young people to socialize with others of similar age and station." The emphasis on similar age was impossible to miss. Grace felt her cheeks burn, but before she could say anything, Deacon stepped slightly in front of her, his body language protective. "I agree completely," he said, his tone pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Which is why I am spending my time with Miss Donnelly, who is exactly my age and station. Now, if you will excuse us, we have those plans I mentioned." He offered Grace his arm, and she took it, walking with her head high past the gaping Mrs. Patterson and her deflated daughter. She could feel the eyes of the entire congregation on them, but for once, she did not care. Let them look. Let them gossip. Deacon had just publicly claimed her as his choice, and the rush of joy that brought was worth any amount of small-town scandal. "I am sorry about that," Grace said once they were out of earshot. "Mrs. Patterson can be rather persistent." "She can be rather rude," Deacon corrected. "And if she speaks to you that way again, I will have more to say about it. You cannot fight my battles for me, Deacon. I have been dealing with women like her for years. Maybe you should not have to deal with them alone anymore." He covered her hand where it rested on his arm with his own. "Let me stand beside you, Grace. Let me be the one who has your back." She looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had stopped praying, and felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been closed off for a long time was beginning to open again, letting in light and warmth and possibility. They spent the afternoon walking along the river that ran behind her property, talking and laughing as the sun moved across the sky. Deacon told her stories about his time on the trail, about ornery longhorns and flash floods and the strange characters he had met along the way. Grace found herself relaxing in his presence, the careful walls she had built around herself slowly crumbling. "Tell me about running the store," Deacon said as they sat beneath a large oak tree, the river burbling softly nearby. "Do you enjoy it?" "I do, actually. I like the challenge of managing inventory, of knowing what my customers need before they do. I like being good at something, being successful on my own terms." She plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "But it can be lonely. Some days, I barely speak to anyone beyond discussing prices and products, and the responsibility never ends. There is always something that needs doing, always some problem to solve. Have you thought about taking on a partner, someone to share the work and the responsibility?" "I have thought about it, but it would have to be the right person. Someone I could trust completely, someone who would respect what I have built and want to help it grow rather than just taking over." "That seems reasonable." Deacon was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I have some money saved up, not a fortune, but a decent amount. And I have been thinking about what I want to do with it. I do not want to be a ranch hand forever, taking orders from other men. I want to build something of my own." "What would you build?" "I have thought about expanding into cattle buying and selling on a small scale. Brownsville is well positioned for trade, with the railroad connections and the proximity to the border. A smart businessman could make a good living here." He looked at her, his expression serious. "But that is getting ahead of myself. I should not be talking business plans when I have only been courting you for 2 days." "I like that you share your dreams with me," Grace said softly. "It makes me feel like you see a future, not just a present." "I do see a future." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I see a future that I very much want you to be part of if you will have me." Grace leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "You should know something about me, Deacon. I am set in my ways. I am used to making my own decisions and running my own life. I am not some young girl who will mold herself to fit what a man wants." "Good," he said firmly. "I do not want you to change. I want you exactly as you are. I am not always easy to live with. I can be stubborn and prideful, and I do not take criticism well. I can be single-minded and restless, and sometimes I do not know when to stop pushing. We are both flawed human beings, Grace. That is what makes us right for each other. We have both lived enough life to know that perfection does not exist, that love is about accepting someone completely, flaws and all." Love. It was the first time either of them had used the word, and it hung in the air between them, significant and fragile as spun glass. "Is that what this is?" Grace whispered, "Love, it is the beginning of it." Deacon cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking gently across her cheekbones. "And if you give me the chance, I will spend every day showing you how deep it can grow." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was nothing like the fumbling kisses she had shared with William years ago. This was a kiss between two adults who knew what they wanted, who were choosing each other with eyes wide open. When they pulled apart, Grace was breathless and flushed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "That was my second kiss ever." "Then I am honored to have been your second," he smiled, pressing his forehead against hers. "And I would very much like to be your last." The weeks that followed were the happiest Grace could remember in years. Deacon courted her with a single-minded dedication that left no doubt about his intentions. He came to the store every day, sometimes to make purchases for the ranch, but often just to see her, to steal a few minutes of conversation in the midst of her busy workday. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, sitting across from her and holding her hand on top of the table for everyone to see. He escorted her to the town dance, spinning her around the floor while half the town watched in scandal and the other half watched in envy. He brought her flowers from the meadows and books he thought she would enjoy and fresh fish he caught in the river. But more than the gifts and gestures, he brought her something she had not realized she was missing: partnership. When a drunk cowboy became belligerent in the store one afternoon, Deacon appeared seemingly from nowhere and calmly escorted the man outside, his quiet authority more effective than any amount of shouting would have been. When Grace mentioned that she was having trouble with her supplier in San Antonio, Deacon offered to ride up there and negotiate better terms, using his knowledge of the cattle industry to secure prices she never could have gotten on her own. In return, Grace shared her life with him in ways she had never shared with anyone. She showed him her account books and asked his opinion on business decisions. She taught him her mother's recipe for cornbread and laughed when he managed to burn the first 2 batches. She introduced him to her love of reading, lending him books and staying up late discussing them over coffee in her kitchen. They talked about everything: politics and religion, hopes and fears, the past and the future. Grace told him about the loneliness of the last 2 years, about nights when she lay awake wondering if this was all her life would ever be. Deacon admitted that he had often felt like a man without a country, belonging nowhere and to no one, always searching for something he could not name, but recognized the moment he saw her. "I know I want to marry you," he said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sun set over Brownsville. "I have known it for weeks now, but I do not want to rush you. I do not want you to feel pressured." Grace looked at him, this man who had come into her life and changed everything. "I want to marry you too, but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of hoping too much. Of believing this is real and then having it taken away. Of not being enough for you once the newness wears off." Deacon turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Grace, I am going to say this as clearly as I can. You are enough. You are more than enough. You are everything I have been looking for and things I did not even know I needed. I love you. Not some imagined version of you, not who I hope you will become, but exactly who you are right now in this moment." "I love you too," she whispered, the words breaking free from the place she had kept them locked away. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you insisted on helping me unload the wagon. Then marry me, not someday in the distant future, but soon. This summer, let us build the life we both want together." Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Deacon let out a whoop of pure joy and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, he said, "I do not have a ring yet. I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I spent the money. I do not need a fancy ring, I just need you. You will have both. I am going to buy you the prettiest ring in the whole state of Texas. And then, I am going to marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." They were married 6 weeks later on a sweltering July morning in the small church where they had first sat together. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her figure, and carried wildflowers that Deacon had picked himself at dawn. Martha served as her witness, and Tom Morrison, Deacon's employer, stood up for him. The church was only half full. Some people stayed away out of disapproval, unable to accept the idea of a 32-year-old spinster marrying a drifter cowboy. But others came, more than Grace had expected. The people who had been her loyal customers over the years, who had seen her strength and integrity. The folks who judged people by their character rather than their age or their conformity to social expectations. And when the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, and Mrs. Patterson actually rose to her feet as if to speak, Deacon turned and looked at her with such cold authority that she sat back down without a word. "I take you, Grace Donnelly, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Deacon said when the time came, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to honor you, to respect you, to stand beside you in good times and bad. I promise to be your partner in all things, to value your opinions and your independence. I promise to love you for exactly who you are until the day I die." Grace's voice shook with emotion as she made her own vows, promising to love and cherish this man who had seen her when she felt invisible, who had chosen her when the world said she was no longer worth choosing. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Deacon kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, and Grace felt complete in a way she never had before. The reception was held at the hotel, a simple affair with cake and punch and dancing. Grace danced with her new husband, his arms strong around her, and felt like she was floating. "Happy," Deacon murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I have ever been. Good, because I plan to spend the next 50 years making you even happier." They spent their wedding night in her house, which was now their house. Deacon carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was too old for such foolishness. "You are not too old for anything," he insisted, setting her down gently in the bedroom and cupping her face in his hands. "You are exactly the right age, exactly the right woman, exactly right for me." He made love to her with patience and tenderness, taking his time, showing her with his body what he had been telling her with his words for weeks. Grace had worried that this part of marriage might be awkward or uncomfortable, that her inexperience would be a problem. But Deacon made her feel beautiful and desired and cherished, and by the time the sun rose on their first day as husband and wife, she was entirely convinced that they belonged together. The months that followed their marriage were an adjustment, as any new marriage is. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small quirks and routines that make up daily life. Grace had to get used to sharing her space, to having someone else's opinion to consider. Deacon had to learn the rhythms of running a store, to adapt his restless energy to a more settled life. But they worked at it, both of them committed to making their marriage succeed. Deacon officially became a partner in the store, investing his savings and using his connections from the cattle industry to expand their inventory and customer base. He had a head for numbers and a gift for negotiation that complemented Grace's organizational skills and customer service. Together, they made the store more profitable than it had ever been under her father's management. They extended credit to struggling farmers, knowing that loyalty built over hard times would pay off in the long run. They began carrying specialty items ordered from catalogs, things that set them apart from the other general stores in the region. They treated their employees fairly and their customers with respect, and their reputation grew. But their success in business was nothing compared to their success in building a life together. Grace bloomed under Deacon's steady love and support, becoming more confident and more willing to assert herself. When Mrs. Patterson tried to organize a petition to have Grace removed from the church ladies' auxiliary on the grounds that her marriage to a former drifter was unseemly, Grace confronted her directly. "My husband is a hard-working, honest man who has done nothing but contribute positively to this community," she said, her voice ringing out in the church basement where the ladies had gathered. "If you have a problem with him or with me, you can say it to our faces rather than sneaking around spreading poison. But I warn you, Mrs. Patterson, I am done being intimidated by your social bullying. I am a married woman now, a respected businesswoman, and I will not be pushed around by the likes of you." The other women had stared in shock at Grace's outburst, but then Martha had started clapping and several others joined in. Mrs. Patterson had left in a huff, but the petition had died there and then. When Grace told Deacon about it that evening, he had laughed with delight and swung her around the kitchen. That is my Grace. I knew you had that fire in you. She made me so angry. How dare she judge us when her own husband is known to drink away half his earnings, and she looks the other way. People like that need someone to look down on to feel better about themselves. But you do not have to be that person anymore. You are not alone. You have me, and together we are stronger than any petty gossip. As their first anniversary approached, Grace began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Deacon, afraid to get both their hopes up only to be disappointed. But when Dr. Williams confirmed it, she could barely contain her joy. She told Deacon that evening after closing the store, unable to wait any longer. He had been organizing inventory in the back room, and she simply walked up to him and blurted out, "I am going to have a baby." Deacon froze, a box of canned goods still in his hands. "You are?" "Yes. Dr. Williams confirmed it today. We are going to be parents." He set down the box carefully, then picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure, uninhibited joy. "We are going to have a baby." "Grace, we are going to be a family." "We are already a family," she corrected, but she was laughing too, caught up in his excitement. "A bigger family then. A growing family." He set her down but kept his arms around her, his expression suddenly serious. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "I am 33 years old. That is considered quite old for a first pregnancy. But Dr. Williams thinks you are healthy, that everything is all right. He said I appear to be in excellent health and he sees no reason for concern, but there are always risks." "Then we will be careful. We will do everything right. And in 6 months we will have a baby and our lives will be even more complete than they already are." He kissed her softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me. For taking a chance on us. For giving me this life I never thought I could have." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from sickness in the early months and fatigue throughout. But Deacon was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over more of the physical work in the store, hiring additional help so Grace could rest when she needed to. The town's attitude toward them had largely shifted by then. Most people had accepted their marriage and even admitted they made a good couple. When word of the pregnancy spread, the same women who had whispered about Grace's age as an old maid now whispered about her age as an expectant mother, but with concern rather than censure. Mrs. Henderson, who had been one of Mrs. Patterson's allies, surprised everyone by showing up at the store with a basket of baby clothes she had knitted. "I know I was not kind when you and Mr. Zimmerman first began courting," she said to Grace. "I am sorry for that. You have proven to be a good wife and a good businesswoman, and I was wrong to judge you." Grace accepted the apology with grace, understanding that people could grow and change, that redemption was always possible for those willing to seek it. On a cold February morning in 1880, Grace went into labor. Deacon paced the parlor while Dr. Williams and the midwife attended to his wife, nearly wearing a path in the floor with his worry. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when the doctor looked concerned, but Grace was strong, and she had survived too much to give up now. Just before dawn, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Deacon burst through the bedroom door to find Grace exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. "It is a boy," she said, her voice hoarse but triumphant. "We have a son." Deacon approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son's small, scrunched face. "He is perfect." "You are perfect. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel, after Deacon's father, and he became the center of their world. Deacon was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a colicky baby in the middle of the night without complaint. Grace nursed their son while Deacon read to them both, his deep voice soothing baby and mother alike. Running the store with a newborn was challenging. but they managed. Martha stepped up to take on more responsibility, and they hired another clerk to help with the increased workload. Customers were understanding when Grace needed to excuse herself to feed Daniel, and many remarked that it was nice to see the store becoming a true family business. Daniel was 6 months old when Tom Morrison approached Deacon with an interesting proposal. Morrison was getting older and wanted to retire, and he offered to sell Deacon a portion of his ranch at a favorable price. It was not a large spread, but it was good land with water access and enough room to run a modest herd. What do you think? Deacon asked Grace that evening after Daniel was asleep. It would be a risk. We would need to hire help, and it would take time away from the store. But it is your dream, Grace said softly. You have always wanted your own land, your own cattle, and we have the money saved. The store is doing well enough that I could manage it with Martha and our other employees if you wanted to focus on ranching. It would mean a lot of hard work for both of us. We are not afraid of hard work. We have never been afraid of hard work. Grace took his hand. Deacon, you gave up your wandering life to settle here with me. You have poured your energy into making my father's store succeed. Let me support your dreams the way you have supported mine. Our dreams, he corrected. Everything is ours now, Grace. The store, the ranch, our son. Our life together. They bought the land and threw themselves into building up the ranch. It was hard work, just as they had expected, but it was satisfying in a way that surprised them both. Grace found she enjoyed the occasional ride out to the ranch, watching Deacon work with the cattle, seeing the pride in his eyes as their small herd grew. She also discovered that she had a good head for the business side of ranching, helping Deacon keep records and plan breeding schedules. They became true partners in every sense of the word, each bringing their own strengths to their shared enterprises. 2 years later, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Georgia after Grace's mother. The birth was easier than Daniel's had been, and Grace recovered quickly. Their family felt complete now. A boy and a girl, the store and the ranch, a life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work. On their 5th anniversary, Deacon surprised Grace with a trip to San Antonio. It was only for 3 days, and they brought the children with them, but it was the first real vacation either of them had taken in years. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, visited the Alamo, and simply enjoyed being together away from the demands of daily life. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sun set over the city while the children slept inside. "Settling down, giving up your freedom, not for a single second." Deacon pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "Everything I did before, all that roaming and searching, it was all leading me to you, to this life. I would not change a thing. Even though you married an old maid that the whole town had given up on. Especially because I married a woman who knew her own worth and did not let anyone else define it for her. Grace, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I did not think I deserved it. You deserve all of it and more." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "When you first asked to court me, I was so sure you would realize your mistake and move on. I kept waiting for you to wake up and see that you could have someone younger, someone without so much baggage. And what do you think now? I think I was a fool to ever doubt you. You have shown me every single day that you meant what you said that first night, that I am exactly the right age, exactly the right woman for you. And you are." He kissed the top of her head. "You always will be." The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their ranching operation and economic downturns that affected the store. There were illnesses and accidents, the normal trials of life that no one can avoid. Daniel broke his arm falling out of a tree when he was 8, and Georgia came down with scarlet fever when she was 5, terrifying them both for 2 weeks until her fever finally broke. But through it all, Grace and Deacon faced everything together, their partnership stronger than ever. They celebrated successes and weathered failures, always coming back to the foundation of love and respect they had built their marriage on. When Daniel turned 14, he started working seriously on the ranch, showing a natural gift for handling cattle that made his father's chest swell with pride. Georgia, meanwhile, showed more interest in the store, learning inventory management and customer service from her mother with the same dedication Daniel applied to ranching. "Look at what we made," Grace said to Deacon one evening as they watched their children working, Daniel helping repair a fence while Georgia reorganized the store's front display. "Not just the businesses, but them, our family." "Best thing I ever did was stop in Brownsville that spring," Deacon replied. "Best decision I ever made was to walk into your store and see if you needed help unloading that wagon. Do you ever miss it? The open trail, the freedom of that life." "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "But I would not trade what I have now for anything. This life, this family, this is what I was searching for all along, I just did not know it." On their 10th anniversary, the whole town turned out for a celebration. What had started as a scandal had become a love story that everyone claimed to have supported from the beginning. Mrs. Patterson had long since moved away, her daughter Emily having married a merchant from Houston and left Brownsville behind. The new generation of town gossips had other subjects to occupy them, and Grace and Deacon were now seen as pillars of the community. "I have something for you," Deacon said that evening after the party, when they were alone in the house they had expanded and improved over the years. He handed her a small wooden box hand-carved with intricate designs. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant in the shape of a key. "What does it symbolize?" Grace asked, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "You unlocked my heart," Deacon said simply. "You opened a door I did not even know was closed. This is to remind you that you will always hold the key to everything I am." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, even after 10 years still moved by this man's ability to express his love so clearly. "I love you. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you. You are everything to me, Grace. Everything." As they grew older, Grace and Deacon found new rhythms and new joys. They handed over more of the day-to-day operations of the store to Georgia, who proved to have inherited her mother's business sense and her father's people skills. Daniel took over most of the ranch work, though Deacon still rode out regularly, unwilling to give up the life he had built completely. They became grandparents when Daniel married a sweet young woman named Sarah and had a son they named after Deacon. Georgia followed a few years later, marrying a banker who had moved to Brownsville from Austin and giving them twin granddaughters. Grace loved being a grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren in ways she had been too busy to spoil her own children. On a warm spring evening in 1905, Grace and Deacon sat on the porch of their home, the same porch where he had proposed to her 27 years earlier. They were both 56 now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work and hard living. "Have I told you today that I love you?" Deacon asked, taking her hand in his. "Only 3 times," Grace replied with a smile. "You are slipping in your old age." "Old age," he scoffed. "Woman, you are exactly the right age." She laughed, the same response she gave every time he said it, which was often. It had become something of a joke between them over the years, but also a touchstone, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. "Do you remember that day you helped me unload the wagon?" Grace asked. I was so sure you were just being polite, that you would move on and forget all about me." "I knew that day," Deacon said. "The moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like my soul was saying, there she is. There is the person you have been looking for. I am glad your soul spoke up. I am glad you did not listen to all the voices telling you I was too old, too set in my ways, too much trouble. You were never too much of anything. You were exactly right." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their children were grown and happy, their businesses were thriving, their family was strong. They had built something lasting, something real, something worth every risk they had taken. No regrets. Grace asked quietly. "Not a single one." Deacon lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had that first night. "You were exactly the right age then, and you are exactly the right age now. You will be exactly the right age for me for every day of our lives." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, still there after all these years. "I love you, Deacon Zimmerman. And I love you, Grace Zimmerman, today, tomorrow, and forever." The years continued to be kind to them. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, their 40th, each milestone a testament to the love they had chosen and nurtured. They weathered the loss of friends and the arrival of great-grandchildren. They saw the new century bring changes to Brownsville and to Texas, the wild frontier slowly giving way to civilization. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's comfort and companion. When Grace fell ill with pneumonia at 63, Deacon barely left her side, nursing her back to health with the same devotion he had shown her since the day they met. When Deacon injured his leg in a ranching accident at 65, Grace insisted he rest and recover properly, taking over his duties until he was healed. They were inseparable, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded either of their individual dreams. Their love story became the stuff of local legend, the old maid and the cowboy who proved that it was never too late for happiness, that love did not care about age or circumstance, or what society deemed appropriate. On a beautiful autumn day in 1920, they celebrated their 42nd anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Daniel gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke about his parents' enduring love and the example they had set for all of them. "They taught us that love is a choice you make every day," he said. "That commitment means showing up even when it is hard. That partnership means supporting each other's dreams even when they are different from your own. Mom and Dad, thank you for showing us what true love looks like." Grace and Deacon held hands throughout the celebration, their fingers intertwined with the ease of decades of practice. When it was finally time for everyone to leave, they stood together on their porch, waving goodbye to their family. "Tired?" Deacon asked, his arm around her waist. "Happy," Grace corrected. "Tired but happy. It has been a good life, has it not? The best life. Better than anything I imagined for myself." "Do you remember when you told me you were too old for marriage?" Deacon asked with a smile. "When you tried to convince me to court someone younger?" "One of the most foolish things I ever said," Grace admitted. "Thank goodness you did not listen to me." "I will never get tired of telling you this," Deacon said, turning to face her fully, his hands cupping her face the way he had done 1,000 times before. "You are exactly the right age. You have always been exactly the right age, and I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "I love you too," Grace whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for choosing me when the world said I was no longer worth choosing. Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found you." They went inside together, closing the door on another perfect day in a life full of them. In the morning, there would be work to do and responsibilities to meet. But tonight, there was just the two of them, still in love after all these years, still grateful for the day a cowboy walked into a store and helped an old maid load a wagon and changed both their lives forever. The story of Grace Donnelly and Deacon Zimmerman became part of Brownsville's history, told and retold to new generations. People spoke of the woman who thought she was too old and the cowboy who proved her wrong. They talked about true love and second chances, and the courage it takes to hope when hope seems foolish. And through it all, at the heart of every story, was one simple truth. Some people are lucky enough to find their perfect match at 18, but others have to wait a little longer, have to live a little more life, have to become fully themselves before they can recognize the person meant to complement them. Grace had been 32 when she met Deacon, 32 when the world told her she had missed her chance at happiness. But 32 had been exactly the right age, because that was when she was ready for him, when she had the wisdom to recognize what he was offering and the courage to accept it. They lived long, full lives, growing old together with dignity and grace, their love never diminishing but rather deepening and maturing like fine wine. When Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, Deacon was beside her, holding her hand. He followed her 3 months later, unable and unwilling to face a world without his beloved wife. They were buried together in the Brownsville cemetery under a headstone that read, Grace and Deacon Zimmerman. She was exactly the right age. He was exactly the right man. Together, they were exactly right. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to remember them, to tell stories of their legendary love, to vow to honor their memory by living their own lives with the same courage and commitment. And in the store that still bore the Donnelly name, now run by great-grandchildren who had never known Grace but heard countless stories about her, there hung a faded photograph from their wedding day. In it, Grace and Deacon stood together, both smiling, her hand on his arm, his eyes on her face. Below the photograph was a small plaque with a quote from Deacon, words he had said so often they had become the family motto. She was exactly the right age. It was a reminder to everyone who saw it that love comes when it comes, that there is no schedule or timeline for happiness, that the right person at the right time can change everything. That sometimes what the world calls too late is actually exactly on time, if you have the courage to believe it and the wisdom to embrace it. Grace had thought herself too old for marriage at 32, past her prime and forgotten by the world. But Deacon had seen her truly, had recognized her worth and her beauty and her strength. He had chosen her not despite her age but because of who she was at that age, a woman fully formed and comfortable in her own skin, a partner rather than a project, an equal rather than a subordinate. Their love story had proven that it was never too late for happiness, never too late for love, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Grace had bloomed under Deacon's love, becoming more confident and more joyful than she had ever been. And Deacon had found his home and his purpose in Grace, his wandering days over, his searching complete. They had built an empire together, businesses that thrived, a family that flourished, a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. But more than that, they had built a partnership based on mutual respect and admiration, a love that sustained them through every trial and celebrated them through every triumph. And when their great-great-grandchildren asked about them, as children always do about those who came before, they heard the story of the old maid and the cowboy, the woman who thought she had missed her chance, and the man who proved that the right time is always exactly when it happens. They learned that love is not bound by age or expectation, that happiness can come at 32 just as easily as at 22, that being exactly the right age has nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with being ready for what comes next. The town of Brownsville changed over the years, growing and modernizing, the wild frontier giving way to settled civilization. But the story of Grace and Deacon remained, a touchstone and a comfort, a reminder that true love exists and that it is always worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the world says you are foolish to hope. And somewhere, in the way that true love stories live on beyond the people who lived them, Grace and Deacon were together still, their souls intertwined as their lives had been, proving for all eternity that when you find the right person, you are always exactly the right age.